Okay, hi all. Today is Sunday. It is September 8th. This Gardening with Joel. We're going to start right here with the eggplants. And the eggplants are starting to get big. You can see two of these are getting really, really big. And then I've got quite a few back here. They're doing okay. I'm monitoring them closely because we're coming to the tail end of the growing season. And they're doing okay. I can always pull those into the house if I need to, because there are going to be days where I'm going to be in the 40s at night. I still have a couple of cucumbers that are still growing in the garden. There's one here, and I think somewhere back here I have another one. I also have a squash. I have a couple, but I don't think those will produce. Oh, I have one down there. I don't know if you guys can see that. As for the beans have pretty much grown out. I need to come in here and grab the onions as they're starting to produce. And I need to get the cabbage. Everything else in the garden is pretty much at the end stages. My tomatoes are still turning red. And they need to be picked. I'll pick the cabbage. The lettuce is pretty much done for the season. And I'm not going to get any peppers. So this will probably be the last video you'll see of the garden for the season. As we're winding down and starting now to get in the fall. I don't know if you can tell. The big tree that's in the backyard is starting to lose its leaves. It hasn't really started to change colors, and that's one tree that usually doesn't really change colors in the season, but it will start losing its leaves, and this is about the time that it starts getting ready for the winter weather. So, let's talk some about things that worked in the garden and some things that didn't. The eggplants in the garden did produce, but something got into my garden that's starting to kill off those plants. So I may not actually get any eggplant in the garden this year, other than the ones that are close by the house that I transplanted into the flower pot. And I'll kind of take you guys out to the garden. I'm sorry, my little doggies are barking. Colin, stop it. Abigail, Bella, stop it. So, if you see these three eggplants down here, well, that one fell off. You can see this one is rotting. And unfortunately, these are just not doing well in the garden. And I've totally lost the two back here. They just, for some reason this year, were not, they grew and then they kind of stopped. Ice, get out of there. Go on. Go on. So, I don't know if it was the new soil that I used in there that they just didn't like. These up here are doing much, much better, and they're harder, and nothing is attacking them. But I've lost more than two of the eggplants in the garden. And I think this year the garden is not going to produce any of the eggplants. So I'm going to go out front for a second. I'm coming to the end of the growing season for the flowers up front, and I'm really not watering them anymore. Just because they're not going to produce, they're really not going to produce any more flowers. All of the petunias have pretty much, you can tell, are not producing any more buds. And that's usually normal at this time of the year for them not to produce. I'm sorry, I'm just walking out to my thing. So, that's coming to an end. The bird bath still has water in it, but eventually, probably in the next coming weeks, I'll be taking the water out and I'll be winterizing the bird bath for the winter. And I'm pretty much going to let most of the flowers just start to do their normal die-off. Now, as for what worked in the garden this year, I will say the tomatoes definitely produced. I have an abundance of tomatoes in the garden, so those definitely did work. My basil really worked, as did the lettuce. I didn't pick as much lettuce as I normally would, and I probably would change that. My zucchini and my squash were really disappointing this year. And I'm thinking that because of how they were planted in the back area of the garden, and that garden doesn't get sun all day long. It only gets sun for about 8 or 9 hours in the morning to the very early afternoon, and then it predominantly goes into a shade. So I'm thinking my squash, zucchini, and cucumbers just did not do well this year because they didn't have a lot of sunshine back there. And something also got into the garden and started eating the plants. I got one zucchini this year, and it looks like I'll have one squash to pick, as well as I did pick quite a few cucumbers. So the cucumbers definitely did okay. They just didn't produce the abundance that I expected them to do. Now, the beans did produce a lot of bean plants. However, I did not plant enough green beans and wax beans to do anything with. And I actually lost a lot of my wax beans because by the time I had enough for a meal for us or a meal for me, the problem is these ones that I had picked weeks earlier were starting to rot. So I've only had one meal of the beans, and I'm probably just gonna swallow and get rid of the rest because there was not enough for a meal. Now, the reason the peppers did not do well and did not produce, I have not gotten any peppers from the garden. The one pepper stayed really, really small and was not big enough to even do anything as a salad. And again, I think it's because the pepper plants did not have a lot of light. They didn't have a lot of sunlight, and they kind of got overshadowed because I put them so close to the beans that they just wouldn't produce this year. Now, my cabbages did produce, but they're not big. They're relatively small cabbages. And the problem with the cabbages is I planted them so close together that I didn't give them the room that they actually need to fully grow and make them bigger. So next year, what I'm going to do is the long garden that is, I'm going to turn you guys, sorry for flipping you, the one that's closest to this fence over here, and we'll go out for a second. Come on, guys. The one where the dogs are in, you can see my white dog and my Jakey are in there. That was meant to be a long garden, and that gets sun. You can see how much sun that's getting. That'll stay in the sun for almost the entire day. So next year, what I'm thinking of doing is filling that with dirt, putting in new boards so that it can hold the dirt, and making that actually the garden that has the eggplant, the peppers, the squash, and the zucchini for next year, and trying that again. My tomatoes did really well where they were. I may just move them up a little bit, and I might put a little bit more of that in. The basil liked where it was, and it did remarkably well. Even though it did not get a lot of sunshine, it did really well in the back garden over here, as did most of the herbs that are back there. Now, unfortunately, because we are starting to come into fall, I'm going to have to let that basil die in there. There's no way to transplant it and bring it in because once it comes into the house, unfortunately, it's just going to croak. Because I don't get a lot of sunshine in the house for that. But basil would be another thing I would grow in the garden. As was the lettuce. The lettuce did do pretty good. I might make the lettuce in a different area of the garden just to give it a little bit more sunshine and see if it will take off and grow a little bit thicker. That's pretty much what I would do next year. Now, if I do cabbage, I would do it in the long thing, and I would definitely space them out so that they have more space. I don't necessarily know if I would plant all 6 plants in the garden. I might do only 3 next year, give them enough room to maneuver. So, that was what happened with the garden this year. Like I said, it's winding down, so I'm going to start pulling plants probably the end of next week or the following week out of the thing. I'm going to start not weeding, but I'm going to start pulling the plants that are not doing well. And the zucchini did have one more flower on it, but unfortunately, like I said, something got into the garden and was eating the flowers, and I noticed its flower was off the plant. So I can pull the zucchini now because he's not going to produce anymore. So that was what worked this year, what didn't. Maybe in another week, I'll have to sit down and actually plan the garden and my thoughts of why my garden didn't do so well. But I thank you guys for tuning in. This is pretty much going to conclude the gardening portion of the videos for the year. I may talk about houseplants and what to do if you bring in plants for the winter time in your house and how to take care of them. But this is basically the end of the growing season for us. So, thank you guys for watching. Tune in next time for a cooking with Joel video, or tune in and watch my remodeling with Joel videos. And I'll see you on the next video.